Hello and welcome to the Higher Learning Exchange podcast, a space for innovators to push the boundaries of education practice and technology. Hello and welcome. I am Carmen Tomás, your host today, and I'm really pleased to be welcoming today Ben Nelson. Hello, Ben.
Hey, Carmen, nice to see you.
Ben has been changing education for 13 years. He's the founder, chairman, and CEO of Minerva, which is a university and also a project. Ben, I don't think we can start this conversation without talking about your vision and what drove you to creating Minerva 13 years ago.
Sure. Minerva is based on a controversial premise, is that education matters. The reality is that very, very few people believe that education matters. Now, they believe that certification matters. They believe that there is a degree that once you hold this magic degree or carry this brand, doors open up to you and your life is great and easy and all the rest. And the empirical evidence is that certification doesn't matter at all. In fact, if you look at incoming accepted students to Harvard University, and you track them, as Harvard has for decades, to see what happens if they go to Harvard or go to any other university or not go to a university at all. Their life outcomes are basically exactly the same. I can guarantee you, if Harvard adds zero value add, 99.9% of other universities clearly don't add that kind of value because they don't have the kind of outcomes even that Harvard students have. Why? Because Harvard knows how to select students. And so it turns out that most people intuitively understand, I can't remember anything that I studied in school. I can't pass a test if I was given it today. And by the way, even if I could, my life wouldn't be any different. And so we discount the value of education, but we think that that's wrong. We think that a real education, not what's done at universities, but what should be done, is all about taking knowledge and then learning what to do with it, how to be able to apply it, how to acquire knowledge, how to learn on your own when you need to, right? And that process, teaching somebody how to learn, teaching somebody how to apply what it is that they've learned in useful ways, in new contexts, that is the goal of education. That is what education really is about. But the fact that universities don't do that doesn't mean that education isn't important. It means that the current system needs to realize what education is and start delivering.
Let's get into how Minerva University is different. One of my passions is learning design. You do claim that students, as part of your university programs, they learn how to learn. So just tell us from the learner point of view what it is that you're doing.
So there are three kinds of things that make a Minerva program a Minerva program. And so those three interventions are pedagogical, curricular, and assessment, and how we approach in the area. So from a pedagogical perspective, we, and I don't mean Minerva, I mean we in the broader science of learning community, have known what should and should not be done in effective pedagogy for decades. We just refuse to apply it as a sector. Active learning is 7 to 14 times more effective than current educational practices, and we willfully decide not to implement it. So that's aspect number one. If you don't actually learn anything, then there's no point in whatever you're being taught, right? So you have to make sure that students during their social learning time, their class time, are engaged, they're deeply processing, they're using and making associations, they're doing the types of things that cement what it is that they are supposed to learn in their brain. So that's the first kind of intervention that we do. And we design lesson plans that ensure that those types of activities occur. The second intervention, which is perhaps even more important, is a curricular intervention. Universities deliver their education in atomized ways. A professor goes into a classroom, and that professor does whatever they want in that classroom. There's no standards, there's no oversight, there's no broader plan. So even when a professor teaches Biology 101, the professor in Biology 102 assumes the students haven't learned anything. So they repeat what happened in the 101 class in the first month and before going on to the 102. And that is, unfortunately, the reality of what an atomized education is. a curricular education, because you know you've implemented good pedagogical practices, you know the students have actually learned, means that the program of study is the most important unit of measurement. The program is coherent, it's cohesive, it stands together, and it enables the student to master what it is that they learn. That's the curricular intervention. Thinking about an education as a program of study, things that universities throw out all the time. They use that language because this is how universities programs used to be structured many, many years ago, before there was enough knowledge to create so much choice. But now, because there's so much knowledge, universities have retreated to what they know, which is providing information. But that's not an education. Right? An education is, how do you apply? What do you use? And that comes to the third intervention, which is the assessment. And if you were to think about how universities assess, they basically say, okay, I'm going to take a period of time, usually an hour, hour and a half, and I'm going to see if in that 1.5 hours, you can recall or maybe even use or analyze what you were supposed to know in the context in which you've learned it. And by the way, an hour after that, you can forget everything. And we have said you are now certified and you know and you can move on. That notion is so absurd that, no human being on the planet could even imagine something like that. Yet that is 100% of universities. Mm-hmm. That is exactly what happens in university. Now, the assessments are a core problem in this way. Not just that they are summative and that they happen in context at the end, but more importantly, that they are tied to this unit called the course. What happens in this 40-hour experience that stretches over 4 months, some universities is 30 hours, so it's even less. But what happens in this 30 to 40-hour unit is the universe in which you get assessed. That's it. Whereas real assessment isn't, can you recall at this one time? It is, can you demonstrate over months, if not years, that you can apply the same idea over and over and over again with greater and greater levels of accuracy in more and more varied contexts. These are all dimensions of breadth of application. And our assessment framework weights that breadth of application over time through formative feedback at much greater levels. In fact, it even ignores single moment depth of application. And that really is the revolution. And so those three areas, the pedagogical, the curricular, and the assessment framework, are what make Minerva programs effective. And that is what enables a student to learn how to learn. It's what enables a student to apply what it is that they have learned in those situations that they have not expected before.
You also claim that your programs are future-proof. So how is your program design future-proof? Even in the in the event of AI, which is here now.
So we have to first understand what AI is here. What we have right now is not a general intelligence. What we have is a large language model-based AI. What does that mean? It means that it takes the collective information that we provided, which is a large language model, is enormous body of knowledge that humans have been able to collect, and it can present and even analyze and reform that body of knowledge in a digestible way. What it cannot do is think. So you can ask an AI model today to say, hey, give me argument number one and give me a counter argument. And it can do both beautifully. Put aside the mistakes it makes and all the rest, assume that'll be worked out with time. That's fine. It can even say, hey, there's substantial evidence that is largely consensus driven that argument number one is true. There is a sizable minority of individuals who believe the other side is true. What it can't do is say, yeah, they're all wrong. They're all wrong because they're not taking into account aspect A, B, C in this area, not because the other side said they're not taking into account, because it can do that. It can look at the critique that has picked it apart, but it can't do original critique of it. And original critique of the other side and come up with something novel, come up with something new. That is what is referred to as thinking, right? And when you teach systematic thinking, this is what you are teaching human beings to do. We have to be able to have greater and greater discernment on the information that we get. Then
there is an element that I don't think has come out yet in your description, which is the what happens, in person versus online, and what students have in your university.
We provide students a bunch of material that they need to digest before class. Sometimes they work in teams, sometimes they work on their own, but they ingest material, they do homework. Then they take all of their lessons online in our own university. It's fully virtual. So it means it's one student, one camera type of relationship. Everything they say is recorded. It gets assessed. They get feedback on what they've said, on what they've typed in class, and they see how they learn, how broadly they are able to apply it over time. But the students live together. They actually live in the same building. And they spend their first year living in San Francisco. And in the next 3 years, they live in 6 other countries, traveling the world together as a cohort. And in each one of those locations, they take what they have learned formally in their class and they apply it in the real world. And so not only do they apply it as part of their class, not only do they apply it as part of projects that are outside of a given class, but that bring the classes together, but they actually apply it in their lived community every single day. A Minerva community of 100 and some students usually come from 60 plus countries in any given cohort. And so just navigating these different parts of the world with people from all over the world means that you are constantly applying your learning techniques, your problem-solving techniques, your abilities to communicate, to collaborate with other people, all of the things that you have learned in the real world, right? Or sorry, in the classroom that you're applying in the real world. Classes are about frameworks, right? They're about the tools that you need to apply in the real world. But if you don't take those frameworks and actually do it, then you're only going to learn theory. You're not.
How have you built these connections and how students actually go in the real world? Tell us about this.
There's all sorts of things that we do to facilitate civic partners, governments, businesses, nonprofits that want to engage with our students, and we facilitate that introduction. And a large chunk of what we do is every single class that we design has what we refer to as a location-based assignment, at least one. And so we tell our students, take whatever class you want to take, whether it's a foundation year or upper level, pick a local institution. And we don't know what city they're going to be in, because sometimes you'll take a sophomore level class when you're a senior. Sometimes you'll take a junior level class when you're a sophomore, right? So you can never tell what city they're going to be in at a given time. So we don't say, go to this museum and talk to that person. We say, hey, you're doing a computational science project that is all around large data analysis. Go find a local institution, get a gigantic data set, and work with somebody who uses that data set to make decisions and, collaborate with them. Good luck. So it's not let's hand something to you. It says, you're welcome to the real world. You're an adult. You're getting graded on this. Don't make it happen, right? And guess what? They do, right? And this is actually what's most important in a well-designed real-world curriculum. You provide the learner the tools that the people they will seek to collaborate with don't have. And so rather than the university student being the apprentice, can you help me, mentor me and all the rest, hard sell, hard to execute, poorly done. And by the way, most people don't know how to be mentors. Instead, the student says, hey, I've got some value add to provide to you.
Okay, that's
right?
it. Okay,
Exactly.
that employability answered, right? Fantastic. I'll come on now to the other sort of area, how you approach costs and efficiency, and how you've looked at this. There's a real crisis with costs and sustainability of the educational system. So I would like you to explain your thinking around this.
So look, when I looked at the higher education cost structure and the system, there were a number, again, of symptoms that were creating completely unsustainable. And that root cause was connected to a fundamental rot of global higher education is actually what we talked about at the beginning. It's not an education sector. It's a certification sector. And the standards are very simple, right? You give me time and money, I give you a piece of paper. That's it. The structures of these institutions are not focused on education. They're focused on certification. And so when you think about public policy, increase access to universities, keep costs down, what's the silver bullet? When we looked at that, we said, wait a second. You go to anybody on the street, an employer, a parent, student themselves, and say, what is it that a university should be doing? Say, they should be providing the best outcomes. And if we know that a proper education will provide the best outcomes, we realize, wait a second, we don't need a campus for a great education. We've got the real world. I need to build a cafeteria. We have things called supermarkets and restaurants. They've solved this food supply chain already. I don't need a performing arts center. There are theaters already built in every city. I don't need a gym. There are gyms everywhere, right? There are parks. There are libraries. All the infrastructure is already built. I can focus on incentivizing the professor to teach, to engage the student, right? And so I can focus all of the money that is required to operate a university on quality because educational quality will yield to quality of outcome. And we've now demonstrated that definitively. And so in that scenario, you can now change the entire equation around the cost structure. All of a sudden, you don't have to replicate the world and compete on the amenity, because all you need to do is locate within a desirable location. Maybe that's slightly higher housing costs, but that's about it, right? You don't need to create an entire infrastructure for the professoriate. Maybe you want to have local professors, but it just as well works with remote professors. We've been doing remote teaching since 2014, well before the pandemic. And we don't have a single office for a single professor because they can work from home, or they can work from the research lab, or they can work from wherever they are that provides them the infrastructure that they need. Right? And so we're able to rethink the cost structure and produce a better than Ivy League quality education by far at almost none of the capital costs. Now, if I'm an existing university, I can look at it and say, yeah, but I'm already stuck. I already have all of those things. Well, that is the notion that we teach our undergraduates called sunk costs. Sunk costs means you've spent the money to build something. Now you've got a very simple question. Does the incremental cost of upkeep provide me an asset or a liability? Or is it an asset that I could replicate for less than the cost of upkeep and make it more efficient? So imagine a university that says, okay, I've got a physical plant. What if I took one of my 4 years or one of my 3 years in the case of the UK and moved it virtually? Right? If I took one of 3 years and delivered it virtually in a higher quality fashion than I can do offline, I can increase my student body by 50%. 1 out of 4 years, I can increase it by a third. Not a single new building, 33 to 50% more revenue, maybe some increased variable costs, more teachers, etc. That's a pretty dramatic change of the ability for a university to change the cost and efficiency equation of what it produces. And if you could increase the quality of education at the same time, how do you not pursue that goal?
We're at a point where people are struggling to imagine the future of higher education. Well, you're a visionary, and you've also proven that you can make those visions a reality. What do you see for the future? How do you imagine the higher education sector in, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Well, in many ways, it's because I am not shy about exposing the problems of higher education. It may sound to people that, I think all is bleak. And I actually think the exact opposite is true. When you think about historical points of big reform movements, where do they come out of? They come out of a public consciousness that the status quo is untenable. The same thing is happening with our institutions of higher education. for decades, because this problem has been going on for decades. There has been obfuscation. There has been this thing. Oh, well, look, the college graduate makes more than the high school graduate, ergo college is more important, which of course is the most absurd analytics that you can make. Not only do college goers come from vastly wealthier families than non-college goers, right? And therefore already have a leg up, but nobody normed that data for IQ, for chosen profession that requires a certification versus not, etc. Whereas if you actually say, hey, how much money are the children of millionaires worth, whether or not they decide to go to college, you may get a very, very different type of response. That perhaps, certainly when you put in the return on investment on going to college, may give you a very, very different perspective. Today, because public confidence in these institutions has collapsed, it has collapsed across the political spectrum. It has demonstrated through employers, through civic society, etc., that the value add is no longer there. The obfuscation cannot work anymore. It cannot delay the inevitable. And so there are really one of two choices that these institutions can make. They can reform. They can go back to purpose. They can think about what is our goal. Are we here to certify or to educate? Or they can bury their head in the sand and a new wave of institutions will put them out of business.
Yeah.
Because the value proposition in a moment of public dissatisfaction will shift. Once they recommit to a true educational enterprise, to apply the effective pedagogical models, the curricular models that will enable those students to be able to apply what it is that they've learned in an assessment and incentivization system that ensures that students going through a degree program deserve to have that degree, raise expectations of students, raise standards, and provide them the support and infrastructure to be able to raise their own ability to execute. Now you can have a different narrative.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ben. You've given plenty food for thought. You've given all the keys for the pedagogy, for the structures to rethink learning in universities. So thank you so much for this work, for sharing it today with us. And I'm sure we'll be having more conversations about more layers about your model for learning. Thank you so much.
Looking forward to it.